Ladies and gentlemen, the program is about to begin. Please take a moment to silence your mobile devices. We would like to remind you that food and drink are not permitted in the theater. Also, please note that photography and audio and video recording is prohibited. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Rei, the Director of Programming for the New York Times live conversation series, TimesTalks, which pairs New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of film, theater, music, science, art, and fashion. To find out who's coming next, please go to timestalks.com and subscribe to our newsletter. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event, live here in New York and live on the New York Times Facebook page and timestalks.com. We're thrilled to be welcoming Adrian Joffe, President and CEO of the iconic fashion brand Comme des Garçons, and Andrew Bolton, Curator in charge of the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The duo are here to discuss the Costume Institute's Spring 2017 exhibition, which examines the work of Tokyo-born fashion designer Rei Kawakubo, known for her avant-garde designs and the ability to challenge conventional ideas of beauty, good taste, and fashionability. The thematic show will feature approximately 150 examples of Kawakubo's women's wear for Comme des Garçons, dating from the early 1980s to her most recent collection. You'll hear much more about tonight's guests from our esteemed moderator, Vanessa Friedman, the fashion director and chief fashion critic at the New York Times. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Vanessa Friedman, Andrew Bolton, and Adrian Joffe.
Thank you all for coming and joining us and for that incredibly warm welcome. And thanks especially to Adrian and Andrew, who had a pretty late night Monday, I would think, so have made a very special effort to be here. Before we start our conversation, we're going to have a brief video excerpt from the last Comme des Garçons show in Paris, just so people who weren't there, like we were, have the opportunity to see what we're going to be talking about. Can we watch the video? Okay. I've got to say, I loved that show. And I think 3 of the pieces from that show actually are in the exhibit, among the 150 in the exhibit, right? The 2 white...
And the paper bag.
The 2 white shapes and the paper bag dress. I'm glad you said that. It was not me who said it. It was you who said it. But I've got to tell you, when I took a picture of the opening looks, the white dresses, and I put it on Twitter and said something about, this is so amazing, it makes me think so much. And I got hundreds of responses that effectively said, what the bleep bleep is that? Right? That is not clothes. And the truth is, it isn't clothes, right? I think of what Rei does as ideas given shape, and she's called them objects for the body, right? But Andrew, you have now officially called them art. So explain.
Gosh, jumping in the deep end. I think that what Rei does every season is try to, in her words, start from zero. So her whole career has been defined by this pursuit of originality, what she calls newness. And it's a very early sort of avant-garde modernist sort of conceit, this idea of always reinventing yourself. In a way, every season, she almost obliterates her past, so she can actually start something new. So I think that is really what her approach is in terms of her creative process. But at the same time, I think she also makes that is art fashion debate redundant, because she doesn't really cling to the sort of hierarchies that are between the sort of the fashion and art debate, and she doesn't really cling to those sort of classifications. But I think it is that constant pursuit of originality that really marks her out as somebody who's unique.
Right, she doesn't like classifications or context at all, right? In fact, you weren't even allowed to have labels on the dresses.
Well, that was actually a decision we made, because Rei doesn't like to explain her work, and she doesn't. She wants the work to stand for themselves. But as a curator, part of your job is to interpret. So we were always at odds, really, right from the start. We were never really on the same page. But I think that what I came to learn over the year of working with her was exactly that. I think that, as a curator, you're desperate to imbue content and meaning in her work. And I think what changed, I was rereading Susan Sontag's essay Against Interpretation, where she was saying that the interpretation is the critic's or intellect's revenge on the artist, meaning if you can't create, you interpret. And her idea was the fact that if you interpret too much, it takes away the subjective response to an object. So that was part of that decision, was to have the interpretation in a museum guide that visitors can read if they wanted to, but at the same time they can go through the exhibition and appreciate the clothing on a more subjective level.
Well, it forces them to actually look at the clothing, because, I know you've seen this too, but often you go to exhibits and everyone who's looking at them is looking at the description and not the actual object. So now they have no choice. I
think it's interesting because it's been open for 2 days, and seeing people walk through the space is exactly what they're doing. They're looking at the objects first, and then they're reading it. So it's actually a really nice, it's a much different approach than what we've done before.
So Adrian, Rei has famously rebelled against the idea of calling herself an artist. Yeah. She has called herself a businesswoman, and as I understand it, she has not wanted to do a museum exhibit in the past.
That's true.
Was it Andrew's charming personality? What changed her mind?
I think it was Andrew's wonderful personality.
Would you bring her?
She never wanted to do it, I think, because she never liked looking back, I think, as Andrew said. Looking back, she's always trying to start from zero. So by definition, looking back, it means there's baggage, there's things like she sees what she's done before. And she was always worried about doing an exhibition because she would be forced to look at things. Now there's always the memory of them, but she kind of tries to put them away and to try and do something new. So she was worried about doing an exhibition that she'd be made to look at the past. And she was trying to tell Andrew in the beginning, I think, that can we have the exhibition with just the last thing I did? Just the last, at least few collections I did. And Andrew said, no, that's not possible. Right? So, and then I was, from all the way through the process, Andrew said, we need this, we need that, we need to explain a little bit where she's coming from, and just tell the story of her work. So I think she finally got the idea, she kind of understood and she accepted the idea, because she was always saying, right, Andrew, that the person that did those things in the 80s and the 90s is not the person she is now. But she came to understand that that's not the point. The point is to show the work to the public and see the history. Even though she didn't want to use the words retrospective or history, it was. She came to understand that, and I think the reason why now was that because what did she say? It was like. Because she always used to say that do it after I'm not here. She'd rather not see the last things. She didn't want to look back and see the past things. But she said, maybe it would be a good idea to do it, so I can sort of show how I would do it if I was ever asked. To set a sample, to in case anybody wanted to do it later. This is like an example of how she would do it.
And were you in the background telling her it was a good idea?
Yes, I thought it was a really good idea.
Was she tempted at all by the fact that she would only be the second living designer to get a solo exhibit at the Met? I mean, did that...
It didn't change anything, no. I don't think that was part of the decision, no.
Why was she only the second living designer, Andrew? I mean, what, were there no good designers in the middle?
I think it was in 1983 when we did Saint Laurent as a living designer. I think that, and it was embraced by the fashion press, but denigrated by the art press. And I think at that time, if you were to ask anybody who's the most influential designer working at the moment, they would all say Yves Saint Laurent. And I think that at that time, many art critics still clung to that hierarchy between art and fashion. And I think that the status of fashion has changed over the years. So that was one of the sort of reasons why it was easier to revisit the idea of a monographic exhibition of a living designer. And the second, because of Rei. I think that, if you look back at the last 40 years, in a way, Rei's changed the course of fashion history. All of the more formal aspects of fashion that we think about, asymmetry, idea of the unfinished, outsized clothes, they were all introduced by Rei in the early 1980s. So in a way, if she didn't already exist, we'd have to invent her. She was somebody who completely changed the trajectory of fashion history. So for me, she was probably one of the most important and inspirational living designers that of the last 40 years.
Was it an issue at all convincing the museum that it was a good idea?
I think until they saw the work. I think initially, as an abstract idea, they were nervous, and then when they began seeing her body of work over the 40 years, it was sort of a no-brainer. I mean, all you need to do is look at her work, and it clearly stands out as art.
Andrew, you mentioned there were some knocking of heads in putting the exhibit together.
Yeah.
Adrian, can you talk a little bit about that, what the disagreements were over?
Can we talk about it?
You can tell us.
No, it was, the whole thing, the point of the whole thing, I think, was the collaboration. The collaboration, once Rei understood that it was, they weren't giving us their space for us to do what we wanted. It wasn't a Comme des Garçons show at the Met. It was really a Met show for Comme des Garçons. And that was basically the foundation of the collaboration. So, they really worked together. There were disagreements in terms of, they were worried about Rei doing the space, which for her was very important to design the space, because always the clothes, for her, it's always the whole thing. It's always the total thing. For her, it was very important to see the clothes in context, in the environment that she created. And I think they were nervous a little bit about that, like looking too much like a shop or looking like any other space. But
doesn't look like a shop.
Thank you, yeah, I don't think it does either. But, and then it was like the curation. There was a lot of difficulties about the space, but we worked it all out, and they each came to understand, and she completely left Andrew free to do the curation. There was things that maybe he wanted to put in that she didn't want to put in, and they argued about it and decided, and she really trusted him and became more and more understanding about what he wanted and why he wanted, and it was all fine in the end.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about what you wanted to put in and maybe what you didn't get to put in, because 150 sounds like a lot, but over the lifetime of a career is actually an extremely small amount of work. So how did you pick what you picked, and what was on your wish list that you didn't get?
Well, I think that what made it easier is that the show isn't a traditional retrospective. It's an essay of Rei's work, and the thesis is the art of the in-between. The idea that Rei's work occupies a space between entities or boundaries, and that she aims to dichotomies, so to speak, and she aims to sort of resolve and dissolve those barriers and create something new. So in actual fact, it's really about hybridity, either hybrid identities or hybrid bodies. So that gave me a focus, and it was something that I didn't realize at the time. I'd always felt that about her work, and it was only after speaking with Rei that I came to realize it's actually very much steeped in Zen Buddhism, this idea of mu, which means emptiness. And I think one of my favorite anecdotes is when there's a journalist called Susanna Frankel, a British journalist, and she was interviewed by, she interviewed Rei about her famous Dress Meets Body, Body Meets Dress collection. And it was the very first interview she ever did with Rei, and she asked Rei, what does your collection mean? And Rei got a piece of white paper, drew a circle, and walked out of the room without saying a word. And in a way, that Susanna took that as being, this collection is so indecipherable, but in actual fact, the circle in Zen Buddhism means the void. And in a way, it was the most illuminating interview that she's ever given, because it was really sort of situating this idea of her work within the space of emptiness. So that helped a lot. And then in terms of the curation, as Adrian said when we first began talking about the exhibition, Rei was very keen that it was just her last 7 collections, because for her, that was really where her mind was. It was her most recent work, and it was almost physically painful for her to look back at previous work. So I think our biggest battle was over the early 80s work, wasn't it? The lace sweater, the holy sweater. She felt that she was just a very different person when she designed that collection. So that was the biggest battle, and there was other battles. But I lost some, she won some. But I think at the end of the day, when you're working with a living artist, you have to respect the final decision. So if there was something Rei was adamant about, like the collection Curiosity, which was a collection with the hands, the trompe-l'oeil hands, you have to respect that decision.
Mm-hmm. You say the last 7 collections. What's special about the last 7 collections, Adrian?
The last, now there was 8 now.
Now there are 8.
Now there are 8. At the time there was only 7, and the first of those 7 was a collection that was maybe one of the most painful she's ever done. She felt she really came to a kind of, she hit against the wall, and she said that she didn't know how she could really do another one, and she was really wishing she could just have a different mindset, be a different person. How can she be a different person in order to do something new again? For her, she was feeling very much the weight of all the experience, the baggage, it got worse and worse. And but she just had this idea of not even trying to make new clothes, not making clothes at all, in fact, which was the theme of the collection, really, not making clothes. And for her, it was a kind of, I think Andrew's often spoken about a rupture. There was a rupture in '79 when she said she'd like to start from zero. And this was almost like the second rupture, when she really thought that the only way to go on was not to even try to make clothes.
So she made what instead?
She made, it was interesting, as Adrian said, there's been 2 ruptures in Rei's career, both of which were prompted by the same impetus, which was to start from zero and create something that hadn't existed before in fashion. And the first was in '79, when she started to create more directional fashions. Prior to that, her work was influenced by Japanese folkloric influences. And then the second rupture was in 2014, where I think that she felt as if her experience to that date was weighing her down, and that it was disallowing her to actually create something new that no one had seen before. So I think that what the difference was that she, in 2014, is that she tried to translate her ideas directly into form. So they became clothes that, in a way, looked more like conceptual art, more like sculpture. Some didn't have arms. So they weren't functioning per se as clothes. They were just pure ideas. It was pure form. So it was less about representation, it was more about abstraction, less about functionality, and more about form.
Now, you divided the show up into a bunch of different dichotomies. Can you talk a little bit about those and why you chose the ones you chose?
Yeah, I think that the show starts off with 4 dresses from 3 collections that, to me, epitomizes one of the most interesting sort of conceits about Rei's work, which is where she's blurring the boundaries between the body and dress. And probably the most extreme example of that was the 1997 collection, Body Meets Dress, Dress Meets Body. So in a way, the dichotomies really came from looking at the clothes. Fashion, by its very nature, is dichotomous. It separates one from the other. And I think that what Rei tries to do is dissolve those boundaries, those walls, to create these sort of new personas, so to speak. So we have one section called Self-Other, which is composed of East-West, male-female, child-adult. And I think in those particular collections, she's sort of fusing both Eastern and Western and male and female dressmaking techniques and practices to create these sort of hybrid garments. So all the dichotomies really came from just looking at her work over the years.
Mm-hmm. How did you guys meet? Like, how did this all start in the beginning?
I remember. It was actually it was in Dover Street Market in London on the cafe, the Rose Bakery.
Yes.
Rose Bakery.
First time.
So we talked informally about doing an exhibition of Rei, but it was really informal. And at that point, Rei just didn't want to do it.
I think.
How long ago was it?
Gosh, I'd say about it was. I just started at the Met, so it was about 2003 when we first met. And then we'd meet over those
13 years.
So 13 years, and we'd meet over those years, and we'd revisit it. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Was that it?
I think more recently, I think we had a conversation somewhere, and you said whenever Ray's ready, he'd love to do it. And I said I'll definitely keep that in mind, and I'm going to try and do it. But
it was a long courtship.
That was a long courtship.
That was about
three or 4 years ago. I always knew that Andrew one day would love to do it. He told me it was his dream to do it, and I think then something else happened, and then I think we talked about the Met Breuer. We talked about the Met Breuer, and I thought that maybe as a building, because I think one of the scary things about doing it was the Met Gala. So I thought if we did it at the Met Breuer, maybe we didn't have to do the Met Gala, right? Remember that?
That was the only reason, wasn't it?
That was the only reason. Yes, exactly. But then, although she loved the building and the outside, the inside didn't seem appropriate for the collection, and she said. Then we went to see the exhibition that Andrew was doing at the time, the Mannesson Machine. Mm-hmm. And she said, no, this is the place. If we do it at all, it's got to be here. This is wonderful. She loved the grandiosity of the building, the institution, the history of it. She really likes that kind of thing. She said, if we do it, we've got to do it here. And then there was a whole discussion, they have something else planned. It's got to do in 2019 or 2020.
Did you dump someone for her?
No, we didn't get... I think
Yeah.
Well, it sort of
Scoop.
ran its natural course, I think.
Because he said you've got to wait till 2018 in that case, or 19, I think. I said,
19.
well, that's going to be too late. Because when Rei wants to do something, she wants to do it right now.
You better seize the moment.
Yes. So I said, it's next year or not at all.
So how did you choose the space you chose? Because it isn't the traditional downstairs costume institute space, right?
I think Rei wanted it. She wanted the biggest place possible that she can have it, right?
She got the second biggest.
Second biggest.
It was I think it was, as Adrian said, she liked the Met Breuer as a building, but she felt as if she couldn't, it was too emphatic as a design space. It was the Breuer. And she wanted a space that was more neutral, where the design could speak more. And I think, Rei, people always think Rei is an iconoclast, which she is, but she also has a very deep respect for tradition. So I think her attraction to the Met was the fact that it was a space which would allow that tradition and transgression to meet, so it was more of a frisson. So there was a show planned for that space, which fell through for one reason or another. So it was really circumstance.
Serendipity.
Serendipity.
Uh-huh. So is there, if you could pick one item that wasn't in the show, what would it be?
I think the one that we only got recently was the lace sweater,
yeah.
And that for fashion curators, it's become the holy grail of Comme. The only example that I'm aware of is at the V&A, and we couldn't borrow that.
They didn't want to give it to you.
They had it. I think they had it for another exhibition, and then it was Rei's head pattern maker who'd been with her for 40 years, who had 3 examples actually. So it really was this stash
in the closet at home.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that was the one that I really was hoping for. That was because it's such an iconic image, particularly with Peter Lindbergh. So that was the one. And I think that the collection that I would have loved to include was the Curiosity collection, because it fitted in so well in the child-adult section. And she has a very playful side, Rei, and I think it really sort of epitomized that playfulness.
Do you know why she didn't give it to you?
I think she thought it was... No, I don't actually.
Nor do I.
I think it was... I think she mentioned something about it being a little bit... It didn't stand up over time, the materials, the elastic had not
I think there was
worn.
something wrong with them, yes. It wasn't any particular reason.
It wasn't a conceptual.
Because it was very
physical.
stretchy and it like deteriorated too much, I think.
Because she didn't want to include anything that she thought was too actually easily accessible, right?
That was fascinating because there's two collections in the exhibition, White Drama and Broken Bride, and they're the collections that were universally loved by journalists and curators when they came out, and that was a battle to include those because Rei felt as if they were too easily understood and too easily embraced. And she felt as if it wasn't provocative enough as a result. So I think that that was a battle to put those two in, those two collections, because I think she just felt they were too easily understood and they didn't contain enough provocation for her.
In fact, didn't Desiree Rogers, when she was White House Social Secretary, wear a dress from the Broken Bride collection?
Right. Yeah.
And then she got
to a state dinner?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Was there anything, Adrian, that you think should have been in that wasn't?
I don't think so. I think everything I liked is there. Mm-hmm. I'm glad Andrew won that battle with the Broken Bride and White Drama. I think there's everything I liked is there.
Mm-hmm. And what is, to you, the quintessential piece of the exhibit?
Quintessential piece.
The one that most embodies what Rei is about.
For me, it's a little bit like the first and the last. It's the Holy Sweater and the last two from the last collection. It kind of brings it all in a circle, the beginning and the end.
Andrew?
I think the Dress Meets Body, Body Meets Dress collection, it was, because even today it's still as shocking as it was 20 years ago.
Can you describe it, just in case people don't know?
It's a collection that completely distorts the body. So it's a collection that has goosed down pads at various points of the body, either on your back or on your hip, as if you've got a dislocated hip or a hunchback. So she completely upended conventional or normative conventions of beauty. And so the idea of a small waist or a pert bottom was completely eradicated. It was just this extraordinary collection that suggested new body forms. And I think that's one of her extraordinary legacies, is the fact that she has taught us that the body has no bounds and that fashion itself is limitless. And I think that collection really epitomizes that. And you look at it now and it's as radical and as modern as it was 20 years ago. So I think it's probably my favorite collection, at least.
Mm. It was colloquially called the Lumps and Bumps collection, right?
Yes.
Which is pretty descriptive. This is a question, I think, for both of you to answer, maybe Adrian first and then Andrew. Do you think the exhibit will change people's understanding of the brand or their perceptions of what it's about? What do you want them to take away from it?
Do you want to go first?
I think just to be inspired by it, to have somebody, a woman in her mid-70s, still producing some of the most radical work of any other designer living today. And the fact that even though she's worked within the fashion system, there are other designers who are creating work outside of the fashion system, but she's worked within it. She's found her own path, and season after season, she changes your eye and makes you think differently about fashion. So I think it's really about seeing her as this incredibly inspirational figure to make you think about fashion differently, to make you question your body. And I think that if you let go of your prejudices and your proprieties, then I think you see the work in a new light. Because it makes you confront your prejudices. So I think it's just a sort of, I think if you go there and look at this work with an open mind, you'll get more out of it.
I think also Rei, she understands that there's like a lot of people who know Comme des Garçons, who appreciate Comme des Garçons, and they'll come and they'll be very excited and happy to see the things, but they know them. I think what's interesting more for Rei is to reach a wider market. She thinks that, with the fame of the Met, and she doesn't think that maybe people outside New York or people who've never heard of Comme des Garçons, she said Comme des Garçons is not at all famous in America. She's worried about having any people coming at all to the exhibition, actually. It's true. But she's really wondering about how the people who've never heard of Comme des Garçons, how they will feel about it seeing. And she's very interested. She's already writing to me as she's getting on the plane, please tell me what people say. Do they know Comme des Garçons? Do they recognize it? Or the people who've just come in because of the Met, because it's a famous exhibition, what do they say? How do they feel? So I think that's what's most interesting for her, is for the people who've never heard of Comme des Garçons to see. And I think what she hopes they'll feel is what she says always when people come and see the exhibition, is they want to feel like positive and make them feel energetic. When she does anything, it's always trying to raise the spirits. She tries to kind of liberate people, really. I think that's what she's hoping, I think.
Did she text you?
She texted me from the plane. She was on the plane about to take off.
It's interesting that you use the word market this would bring her to a bigger market. Because the one thing that I kind of miss seeing the exhibit, which is wonderful, is the fact that she is an incredible businesswoman. She's really built a terrific brand, and she's created a situation for herself where she has the freedom to do this kind of extraordinary creative work because she has a base of, of really good clothes. I'm sure some people here are wearing them. You raise your hand. That sell. And I sometimes think that people get so distracted by the conceptual, strange, challenging nature of what she does that they miss the fact that she is really practical. So I wonder, Adrian, since this is your thing, talk about it a bit.
I think for her, being, establishing the values of Comme des Garçons in the very, very beginning, which was like to make a company that was based on creation. For her, it was a meaningless exercise if there wasn't a business behind it. For her, it's always been number one, creation, and number two, business. One didn't exist without the other. For her, it's never been about creating something just for its own sake. It's a business. She wanted to make a living. She wanted to be independent and free. And this was what she decided to do. She just decided to do a company that, had as its core value to do something new, to do creation. But she always was very strong about, how would that translate to a business model. And as it grew and as it developed, we've grown by having other lines, but each line is a creative idea, whether it's even the play line, which is so popular. The very idea of having a whole line based on one iconic face is a creative business idea. So for her creation, she actually creates the company, designs the company. So I think that's the secret of the business model we have, is that intricately linked notion of business and creation. Business is creation.
And how big is the company now? How many lines, how many people?
Lost count, I think. It's about 16 different brands, 16 different lines. Because she's never liked to own factories and do vertical growth. She never liked to own the factories, like the factories to keep their own motivation. And we haven't got so many shops. So we grow horizontally more. Each line has its own concept, has its own market. And it's also about the shops. The shops are also, it's like a creative retail strategy. Everything is kind of linked. It's the totality of things. But there's including the perfume, I think there's 16.
Okay, now I think one of the nice things about the gala, even if she didn't really want to be part of it, was the fact that we actually got to see some people wearing, wearing Rei's work, and it was fantastic, and really sort of put paid to the idea that it wasn't wearable. So let's look at some of them. And I think if Caroline Kennedy can wear it and look that happy, clearly anyone can wear it, right? But I do sometimes wonder, when people who don't know the brand do go to the museum and see Rei's work, are they really going to look at it and say, oh my gosh, look at this cookie thing. We have a cookie thing.
This one's an amazing piece, actually. It's made out of 3 jackets. So you have the base jacket at the front, and then she's used the same jacket but draped them as sleeves. So it's extraordinary. Technically, it's extraordinary.
Adrian, one of the things you've talked about is the fact that, Rei is interested in people reacting to what she does. Yes. So they don't have to like it as long as it affects them in some way.
Yes, that's totally true. She doesn't expect, it's never been for the majority of people. She knows that. But as long as there's a reaction, whatever it is, her work is done. It's very important to feel something, to be moved one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So it's important.
Andrew, with the Costume Institute, with the costume exhibit at the Met, it's a very specific role. It has a very specific role in the museum, and part of its appeal is kind of outreach, right? You've done big blockbuster shows, and it brings an audience to the museum that isn't necessarily their typical audience. Do you think about that at all when you're doing a show? Do you think, this is a very specific taste or idiosyncratic taste, and it may not drive the traffic we need?
Not really. It's more about trying to think of a subject that's relevant at that particular moment in time. So I think that's what I try to aim for, is something that will speak to an audience. And we try to do a dynamic program. So sometimes it's thematic, sometimes it's a monographic designer. We've done Poirot, we've done a conversation between a living and a dead designer, Schiaparelli and Prada. So I think it's really just trying to come up with a exhibition that will also try and make people think differently about fashion and differently about the issues that fashion embodies. I think that what I always find fascinating about our shows is that because everyone wears clothes, everybody has an opinion about them, so it's a very democratic and a very accessible art form. So when you look at our galleries compared to other galleries, people are chatting away and they've got a definite opinion, whereas in other galleries they're a bit more respectful. So I think it's that accessibility and that sort of democracy of fashion that people respond to. So it's more about relevance, I think.
Now, I remember your former co-curator, Harold Coda, telling me once that the decibel level in costume exhibit shows was significantly, measurably higher than the decibel level in any other show.
Which is so nice as well, because I think people aren't afraid of fashion. They're not afraid to state their opinion about it. And I think that part of fashion's power is that subjectivity, that ability to imbue sort of subjective narratives, and I think that's part of its power.
Mm-hmm. You said that you like to do exhibits that are sort of have resonance at a specific moment in time. So this is a kind of weird moment in time that we're all in right now. How does that reflected in Rei's work? Why is her work particularly meaningful now?
I think because apart from she's a designer who's always has gone her own way, but her clothes are all about freedom. They're all about independence, freedom of thought, freedom from convention, breaking the rules. And I think it's nice to be reminded of a designer who, at the end of the day, that's really what she, would you agree, is
yes,
the
totally.
ultimate sort of ambition is this idea of freedom and independence.
Which is what we need right now. Right?
Adrian, you said she was really struggling when she hit the I want to stop making clothes wall. How difficult is the process of creation for Rei? What does she go through, and what goes into making this work?
Well, it's definitely extremely, extremely difficult. Every time it's like torture, it's hell. She says it's just coming, ideas are coming from all over. It's not just like one inspiration and then she just like develops one idea. It's for her, in order to do really something new and something strong, it's never satisfied. She gets the first idea, maybe the first word, or maybe a color or a fabric, and then there's subtext, there's things coming in. So until the very last minute, it takes maybe a whole process of maybe 4 or 5 months. But it's a constant thing of like self-doubt, and this is strong enough, and we need something else, and then we get something else, and then it's not enough, we need something else to come in, and it's like multi-level. It's never like, she's never sure, it's like so much doubt in there. So it's a process that's very painful for her, that's for sure.
And how does she work? I mean, she doesn't sketch. Does she sketch?
She sketches sometimes she said to me, like, they're not getting what I'm saying, I have to write something down. But, I think it's a kind of last resort thing. She does sketch a little. But it's a lot about discussion, trial and error. It's often like sometimes she does a collection when she says, I'm not going to use any body, it's got to be on the table. We've got to make everything on the table. There's always like an idea, it's lateral thinking. As Andrew talked about, it's a little bit like Zen. It's like getting an idea from another place. It's not like logical. And I think there's various ways, Sometimes it's very abstract a lot of the time.
And I mean, it sounds like a lot of her battle is with herself,
Yes,
and pushing her own ideas. But is it also hard to be in a position where you're constantly breaking rules and, challenging people's ideas of what's appropriate?
It's very, very difficult. But she is her own worst enemy in terms of that. I think it's also because of the expectations of people. The more you do and the better the last one was, the harder it is to do the next one, because people expect, they come to be moved and feel something, and then she knows that, and so that's her standards that she's built for herself. If she said, okay, this one, we'll just like do this and it'll be okay, I'm sure. But her standards are so high, self-set standards are so high that I think she's her own worst enemy in that respect.
We're in a time now in fashion where things move incredibly fast, where designers are producing more and more collections, being asked to produce more and more collections. It all goes up, it goes on sale, it goes out. How much do you participate in that or not?
Not at all. No.
And how do you manage not to?
We really have always done our own thing, I can't even say it, see now, buy now. For us it's like nonsense, why would you want something that you see now? Why do you need to have it right now? It's like, but in terms of trends and things like that, we've never taken any notice of anything. She hardly sees anything. She doesn't go out much.
She went to the party.
Yeah, and she did the red carpet, even though she said she'd never do that.
And she went to the after party.
And she went to the after party.
Given that, Andrew, it would seem to me that you have raised the bar for her incredibly high with this exhibit.
Yes.
If she's constantly challenging herself to what to do next, like how do you beat being only the second living designer to have a solo show at the Met? What kind of reality have you guys created for yourself now?
It's a very good question.
You know her better than me.
For her or for him?
For both
Rei?
of you, actually. For both of you.
I think it was Rei came last Thursday, so 4 days before the show opened, and that was my biggest anxiety, was to see how she would respond to it, because it was the first time she's seen her body of work together in this space. I think before that it was abstract, wasn't it, for her? She saw it as an empty space almost. She saw it as the architecture and without the clothes in there. So that was anxious for both of us, and it took her probably a day.
Say that again.
She went through many times, and it was only the day afterwards that she seemed to relax into the space and to seeing the earlier pieces, because she once said that looking at the earlier work was physically painful for her. But I think she grew to accept it, and she grew to sort of.
Her biggest worry was the relation of the space that she'd done with the clothes. She was worried that it was so perfectly executed. They did an incredible job making what she designed. It was the execution of the architecture was perfect. But she was worried that how the clothes would relate to that architecture, and that you can't. We made a mock-up because in order to convince them, the Met people, for A to design the space, we made a life-size model in Tokyo.
Life-size?
Life-size. It was
a life-size model. How big is life-size? What are the dimensions we're talking?
The same dimensions as the exhibitions. So she found a space 2 hours outside of Tokyo. Yes. That was the same space as the height-wise,
but how big is it? It's big.
Gosh, I'm so bad at dimensions. It's big,
You must know.
Okay, like in this hall, how big is it compared to this hall?
Neil would know. What is it?
116,000 square feet. Right?
So that's because it's lecture theatre.
That's big.
She made the same thing, but in order to show them the impact, and because they said it might be difficult, it was hard, and it convinced them totally. The people came, and that was when you
it was a process. In terms of the design, we started early on talking about the design of the space, and there was lots of to and fro, and Rei presented a model in Paris about 6 months ago. Which
small model?
A small model, yeah, about this big, and we the design team at the Met and myself worked with her in terms of certain space that didn't quite work. Right. But again, it was hard to. I could see it intellectually, but it was hard to know how one would experience a space, which I think Rei sort of understood, which is why she built it life-size. And because it's difficult, you see a little model with little sort of structures, and it's really difficult to see how visitors would experience it and navigate through it, and see how the work would look in that space, because the last thing we wanted was for the architecture to dwarf and diminish the works on display. So there was a balance that was needed, and a sort of synergy that was needed between the clothes and the architecture.
And she really listened to you. There was a lot of things that, Andrew said how many pieces he needed, how many different spaces for each of the themes, each of the curatorial narration, what he needed, and she, suggested ideas of, she wanted things on the floor as well, she wanted things accessible. And Andrew said, well, some of them be on the floor, we need some raised, and so then Rei raised some. It was a really, an amazing collaboration between what he needed to show his story, to tell his story, and what she wanted to kind of to create to show the clothes, you know. But then the model was not solid. It was in like transparent material, which was the very big shock and the difference of seeing the model and seeing what actually happened, which was, you know, solid white.
Now, when she does her collection, she has a kind of, it's a title, sounds a little bit like a Zen koan to me, for each collection, and that's as much information as we all get about what's in her head. Did she have one for the space?
No, she didn't. No, didn't have one for the
more
space.
about, the description was space and emptiness. So it wasn't really a title per se, but it was a
Not
description.
like the collection, yes.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Andrew, how nerve-wracking was this for you? Because, you know, normally when you're doing an exhibit, it's your idea, and you do it, and so no one has to come and approve it. Right?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge actually was normally you have a curation and you design around the curation. And this time it was topsy-turvy. You know, you had a design that the curation had to sort of fit into in a way. So that was the biggest challenge. And we navigated just by conversation and just changing over the 6-month period. But yeah, I mean, I think, and especially Rei of all people, you know, because you're in a way you're sort of you're creating a legacy for her, and it's something that, you know, we wanted her to feel comfortable with. And I think that the idea of the art of the in-between was sort of quite a light-handed sort of interpretation for her, because it still allowed people to respond to the pieces in a more subjective way, a more emotional way. But you also had this narrative that people could also, it was a way in really to one type of way into it. But yeah, for sure, it was sort of, you know, we had many tense conversations about the curatorial, the curation and the design. So we arrived, where we started and where we ended was radically different.
Where'd you start?
The last 7 collections. So, you know, with the idea of just having the most recent work and then sort of starting where we ended up. So it was a huge a journey.
Did you have sleepless nights?
Yeah.
Adrian, did you?
Me too, yes.
Okay, I have 2 more questions, then we're going to open this up to the audience and also to our Facebook Live audience. Adrian, you know, Rei didn't want to have an exhibit. She's now agreed to have an exhibit. Is this something you think she would ever do again?
She will probably definitely not do it again. No, she did it for the Met, for Andrew, and to set the sample, you know. There's no reason to do any other one again, unless we did another one with Andrew, a version of this. I mean, for me, that's possible. I think it would be nice to take it around the world. You know, honestly, I'm not sure that's something the Met would agree to, but we wouldn't ever do something like this with a different person or a different institution.
So does she really see this as her legacy, as the kind of framing of her legacy?
Yes.
Andrew, having now...
It's sort of terrifying.
No pressure.
I mean, what's so lovely about the exhibition is that more and more people get to see her genius. So, I mean, that's something that I think is really, really rewarding for all of us, is that you get to see this incredible woman who, as I say, has completely changed the course of fashion history in the last 40 years. So, I mean, that to me is my biggest joy.
Mm-hmm. Having now done this exhibit with a living designer, would you do another one?
Absolutely, yeah. And, yeah, I have someone in mind. But.
Oh, you do? But not next year.
Not next year. A few more years, I think.
Breathe. Okay, we have a roving microphone that's going to move around the room. If people want to raise their hands to ask their questions, we will call on you. Yes, this gentleman here in the 4th row. You. Wait, the microphone will come to you.
Was menswear ever a consideration to include in this show?
Yeah, where was the menswear?
Yeah, no, it was for sure, but we only had really 9 months to pull the show together, so it just seemed so overwhelming to look at the menswear collections and the women's wear collections. So it was more of a practical decision more than anything else. But we definitely thought about it, but it was really about what we could manage within the time period we had.
And I think for Rei, the most important, like the engine of the whole company, the whole history of what she's done, is the main collection. You know, the men's you need 2 arms and a jacket for a man.
You are wearing Comme des Garçons menswear, I assume.
Yes, yes.
Do you want to stand up, model?
No. Thank you.
Okay. Is there another question?
This question's more of a question for Adrian, but I wanted to ask, you talked about how Rei had such a difficult time creating new collections, and you also mentioned that the Comme des Garçons group has 16 brands, including perfume. How does she really touch upon each different brand and have that brand kind of spirit in towards everything, and how does it not cannibalize each other, because we're having such a hard retail environment right now. Everyone's doing it's really tough for everybody. So yeah. How are you guys keeping that integrity, and how are you guys really keeping the brand spirit strong?
It's a very good question, I think. I mean, first of all, the 16 brands are not all done by Rei. There's a lot of brands that are done by people who've worked for Comme des Garçons a long time, and after a while they've proved themselves, they have some talent or some creative ability. She gives them the freedom to do their own brand under the umbrella. You know, there's like Junior Watanabe, there's about 4 or 5 of them, and they have their own labels, you know, under the umbrella. So she doesn't do all 16, but she does about 9. And the problem of cannibalization is a very important point. There's, you know, each brand does have its own concept, its own market, but like for Comme des Garçons, there's Comme des Garçons, there's Comme des Garçons Girl, you know, and there's sometimes the borderline is it's a struggle to keep them very separate. And often people don't know the difference between them. So it is a constant struggle, but because there's, we try and explain, and they are different collections. And I think the way to keep the spirit is just the way that she works every day. You know, every day coming in, the first one in the office, the last one to leave. I think that spirit of hard work is imbibed by all the staff, you know, and I think that's how the spirit of the company, and everybody follows her and watches her, and I think that's how, because she's so strong and because she has her eye over everything, I think we managed to keep kind of, you know, integral, and the sense of values of the company are maintained.
Hi. I had a question actually about the catalog, because you did such a very unique thing by photographing the clothes on models for the catalog, which isn't always very common. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, why you chose to actually photograph them on specific real-life women instead of dress forms?
Yeah, normally when objects enter the museum, once we acquire something, they're not allowed to be worn on a living person again. So, you know, fashion needs a body, and fashion's made for a body, clothes are made for a body. So it was an opportunity to show them on live models, to show how they were intended. So I think it was really for the dynamism that you get from clothes being on a living body. And originally it started off, the idea for the catalogue started off as a magazine, which is why we chose so many different photographers. Once we got the body of work in, we decided it would look better as more of a traditional catalogue. And we had a mix of photographers who Rei has worked with over the years, like Paolo, newer people like Ori. But it was mainly the fact that we wanted to animate the clothes and show them as they were intended to be worn.
I have a question from Facebook Live, and then we'll go back to everyone else. Rei's designs are almost an art form. Talk about the difference between fashion and art, because, okay, she maybe breaks down the barriers, but there is a difference. So what is it?
I've always felt that fashion is an art, but not all fashion is art. And it varies. You know, you think about someone like Azadine, his work is art because the technical refinement of his work is very different from Rei. Rei is more about ideas and concepts. If you think about, you know, the two opposites in terms of how art is expressed within fashion, you think about Azadine, who's the sort of technician, and Rei, who's the ideas concept person. So in a way, they're the two polarities. But I don't believe in that hierarchy between painting, sculpture. To me, it's about quality, it's about originality, it's about ideas. And that can be expressed in any form, any medium whatsoever. So to me, it's just about being a master of your métier.
Do you think there's a difference, Adrian?
I think it depends on the definition of art. What is art? You know, some art
What is art?
Some art is not art. You know, and a lot of I think it really depends on what you call it. For Rei, I think why sometimes she accepts the notion of that maybe, as Andrew said, she accepted the notion that she's a modernist, not a postmodernist. It's about creation. It's about, you know, art is supposed to like express a feeling and be something new, something creative. So some art is and some art isn't, and some fashion is and some fashion isn't. For us, the borders between are not important.
So I'm going to hog them one more time. We'll come to you in a second. Do you think that the speed of fashion is antithetical to making something new?
I think the speed of fashion, part of its charm is its ephemerality. And I love that about it. I think sometimes the speed of fashion doesn't allow designers to reflect on what they've done, reflect on their ideas. And I think when it comes to something like, it makes fashion sort of dispensable and disposable, and designers themselves also dispensable. So it is a concern. But at the same time, I do think that part of fashion's, the power of fashion is its ephemerality. It's one of the reasons I think why some people don't feel it is an art form, because it's an ephemeral art form. But I really think it's part of its power.
Do you want to add anything?
No.
Yes.
To sort of piggyback on the, I think, Facebook question, the Met Gala itself has sort of turned into this very big, glamorous, celebrity-studded party. And does the party itself, and the fact that, although it's forbidden technically, but like the bathroom selfies, does it sour the actual art and the sort of the essence of the exhibitions themselves, or is it sort of empowering because it's bringing, especially with, you know, the boom of social media, a wider audience to art that, you know, you guys and, you know, the more art crowd care so deeply about?
I think the gala is extraordinary. It has its own momentum, and it is very separate from the exhibition.
Absolutely.
It's there really as our biggest fundraiser, so we wouldn't be able to do the work we do without Anna's support and the gala. So it's something that I think is extraordinary, and at the same time, I do think that we benefit in terms of the fact that the attention that the gala gets, we bask in its glory, basically, and the attention that the gala gets then is reflected onto or deflected onto the exhibition. So, but it has its own momentum, for sure, and I said we really couldn't do the work we do without it, and yeah.
Adrian, how did you feel? Because I know, I mean, clearly Rei was conflicted about the idea of the party, although she did go and have a good time. So,
Yes.
you know.
As Andrew said, I think it's a fundraiser, and I think without that there wouldn't be the exhibition. It's an amazing thing that they raise the money for the year to fund and to finance and buy new works through the Met Gala. It's not a problem. She was not really conflicted. She just didn't want to kind of pose, you know. I think that was. But she was very curious and very intrigued and very interested in the gala.
I think it's a good question to throw out to the audience too. I mean, do the people in the room feel that the attention paid to the party changes how you feel about the exhibit? If you do, raise your hand. Okay, so no one does. So there you go. Okay, yes, sir. Can you wait so they can hear you?
Thanks. In the catalog, Rei talks about always being limited by time in order to complete a collection. In fact, some of the regrets that she has about collections comes from running out of time. And I wonder, I mean, she has the freedom to do whatever she wants to do. Has it ever occurred to her to sit out a line and spend more time on a collection?
I often say that to her, you know, sometimes when she's really struggling and she says, I can't do it, I can't come to Paris, this one is not going to work, I've started with the wrong idea, this is really terrible. I said, well, let's just miss it, I think it's okay. But for her, she said, the time restraint that is set by the system and the Paris shows and stuff is very necessary to her. It's like it's when you give, often even when she's designing, the constraints and the restraints of time and self-imposed restraints kind of gives her that kind of forcing her to kind of come out with something. So, she would never, she said, she's always feared that if she does miss one, because I said she should miss this last March one, she was so busy with the Met and with many other things. She said it's impossible because she's afraid that if she stops, once, she'll not be able to start again.
Yes? Can you pass this down, please? Sorry, it's being passed.
Thank you. Hi, this is for Adrian. So it's clear that Rei, she attempts to push boundaries and that she's all about freedom from thought and convention and independence, but she still cares about how her work is perceived and the reaction that people have. So it seems that she's not free from herself. Does she think that absolute freedom is really possible?
Good question.
Very good question. I think it's the paradox, it's the paradox. She's always wanted people to feel free and do what they want and be independent. And yet, often it seems that she's the least free person I know. She's not independent, she's not free. It's a constant paradox, I think, for her. But I think the striving for that is what matters. It's striving for that. She wants to show that you can be free. You can be free. You can have free thought. And I think it's not the actual result that matters. It's the process. It's the means. I think, more than the end. I think she does think it's not possible, though. But
So
it's
that's
worth
another
trying,
one
right?
of those dichotomies that
Yes.
Andrew captured.
Would you say so? Would you agree? Yeah.
Yes.
How do you both think about the relationship between the runway collection and the retail lines?
The connection.
The way that one influences the other and how they kind of inform each other.
Well, I think it starts with the main collection, the show collection, the main line, the engine of the whole thing. And then there's so many ideas in there, they kind of get filtered down. There's a very strong connection. There's even the last one we saw in the beginning, I want, when I first saw that, because I see that before I see the exhibition where people come and do their buy and all the shops come and find things that they think they can sell to their customers. I really wondered about this time how would that translate? But it translates in different kinds of ways with techniques, with materials. And, because it's a business, because it has to be a business, otherwise there won't be a next show. There's all kind of different ideas, and then the other brands, again, are filtered down again. It's more like a style than a kind of creation. The first one is the creation, and the rest of it is like style and concepts for different brands. But there's a very strong connection. Nothing is independent. Everything is interlinked and strongly connected.
It's like trickle-down economics.
Yes, that's what it's like.
Has anyone ever tried to buy you? Speaking of economics.
There's been some discussions, yes.
You have another question? Yeah, someone in the back.
Hi, I just came from Japan to see the exhibition, and then are you quite sure you've already talking about that, but are you sure it's not coming to other countries? Because it's my second time to visit Met. I mean, like McQueen, that first time was with McQueen. It's come back to London, so I hope it's coming to Tokyo, but are you quite sure it's not happened?
It's not happening yet, but who knows? The future we'll know in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing decided yet.
Okay, I have to see quite seriously tomorrow.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. There's someone in the back.
Hi, I just first wanted to say thank you for each of you. Your work is so inspiring and insightful. I'm very interested in how you, Dover Street Market and Comme, how you support and help young businesses like Simone Rocha and Gosha, and what is the drive behind that, and what are the reasons, and who's behind that, really?
Who's behind it? We're behind it.
What are the reasons for why you choose certain brands and certain companies and certain people to support and help?
You know, it's a lot of people get a mistake that we kind of, for us, it's not like how do you say? It's like sharing a space with like-minded people. You know, the idea of Dover Street was to kind of, because it's a very lonely place, you know, when you're doing creation, when you're doing art, when you want to make something new. Often Rei's talked about, you know, being lonely, and so the idea of Dover Street was to get a big building that's too big for us alone, and then we sort of share the spaces, give them freedom to do what they like, and the way we choose them is that they have something to say. They have like a vision of their own. It doesn't have to be our vision. It has to be, at least they have a language, a kind of something to say, really, I think is the best way to say it, you know. So we help, but they help us. It's a two-way street. We don't help them and they don't help us. By, you know, having these all different kinds of creative people in our space, in our different spaces, it kind of makes it's a synergetic kind of idea where 1 and 1 makes 3, you know. So people, we give them the freedom of a space, but they give us back, you know, to make an interesting retail idea. It's really like a give and take situation, and it's very hard to decide who gets the space. I mean, that's you know, we have people to look, and people come to us, and it's hard to know exactly the criteria. It's got a lot of it is instinct and intuition, but you know, we like to sort of mix it all up. You know, even like luxury brands, and even the student coming out of a degree show, they both have something to say, and that's what's important.
Okay, one final question. Let's go back to the middle.
A bit off topic, but while have access, this is a question for Vanessa.
No, you can't end on me. No.
Yeah, we can.
Ask them something.
In this day and age of social media, where a lot of people can find a voice and an audience to hear their opinion, I wonder what you see as the value that's added as being a fashion journalist with actual professional experience, and what, I guess, the sort of future of that industry looks like, and how fresh talent is brought into the fold.
I'm going to ask them, because this really is about them.
I wasn't listening because I thought it was for Vanessa. So I thought I was off the hook.
Me too. I didn't.
Email me afterwards, and I'll answer. One question for these guys. Yes. It's coming. It's running.
Hi. At the beginning of this talk, the slideshow that we viewed from her collection in Paris seemed very otherworldly, almost like outer space, and yet reminiscent as well of a microcellular sort of level, the way the pieces and the models were moving around. It made me wonder where Rei is drawing her inspiration from outside of the fashion sphere. For instance, from biology, from music, from the cosmos, where does she look to, you know, you get it.
It's a hard answer. I think it's from everywhere. It's not from any one particular thing, you know. She doesn't look, there's no historical references. It's like really, she's always said it's from her head, it's inside her head. And, you know, the starting point of that last one was, what was it again?
Invisible Clothes.
Huh? No, not Invisible Clothes, I can't remember.
This collection.
It was a silhouette, wasn't it?
New silhouette.
Future silhouette.
Yeah, future of silhouette. Thank you, Vanessa. new silhouettes. So she really concentrated, and she didn't do any sketching this time, and there was no patterns either. It was really like sculpture. It was just the idea for this time, every time is different. But this time she thought she'd work on the future of the silhouette. And so it was really, she got the people to sculpt her. And so, they're very difficult to make. Some of them take 2 or 3 weeks to make. And it was like trial and error. And each new shape, she would see how beautiful it looked or how strong it looked. So it's like a trial and error series, a process of experimentation.
The fabrics are interesting, weren't they?
And then exactly. So there's always that. So that's the first idea, and then the second idea was to use fabrics that are not woven. So there was everything was like either felt or crushed, or like it was all non-woven fabric. So there's an example of the subtext that came, and it's just all these multi-level things that ended up in what you saw.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, guys. And now we'll exit.